That's what the Sicha is saying. The Sicha is describing Harem and Gvois, right? That's how the Sicha goes. Mountains and hills. We're on page 216. The Rebbe says it's based on the Maimed that the Rebbe said. This fabric, Yud Beis Tamuz. We're still doing Yud Beis Tamuz. And the pasuk says, Ki mereish tzurim erenu umagvois ashurenu. Mereish tzurim erenu umagvois ashurenu means the ovis and the imois. The ovis are compared to mountains, and the imois are compared to small hills. So the Rebbe says, Bepashtus, a small hill is a lot smaller than a mountain. But the inyan pnimi of a small hill is that it's negeya l'maisa. So the Rebbe says, yeah, there are big ideas. There are big ideas. There are theoretical ideas. There are philosophical ideas. But the point is, the Eibishter created the world for action, and that's the inyan of Gvois. That's how the Sicha goes. That the Harim, the mountains, represent the big ideas. And the Gvois represent, if you will, the practical ideas. Okay, so the Rebbe said in the Sicha yesterday, and we talked about it a little bit, that women were entrusted with the most important things. Right? First of all, the Rebbe brought the Safra. The halacha is that when it comes to inyonim of Isser, that means kosher and treif, and tameh and tahir, and all of these things, one person is believed. You don't have to, a house does not have to have a mashgiach. A house, it's kosher. Who do you trust? You trust the balabasta. And the same is true in many areas. A woman is entrusted by herself to look after her home in the most important areas, and there are 3 points. The Rebbe emphasized this primarily 2, but there's 3 points. One is taras hamishpacha, the other is kashrus, and the third is chinuch. Right? These are 3 of the 10 mivtzoyim. When the Rebbe made the 10 mivtzoyim, 3 of them are the mitzvahs that are connected specifically to women. This is a 4th, because you have kashrus achila shtiya, you have taras hamishpacha, you have Neidah Shabbos Kedesh v'Yom Tov, and then you have chinuch. The Rebbe doesn't speak about Neidah Shabbos Kedesh v'Yom Tov. He speaks about those ideas that are the most important thing in Beis Yisrael, that the woman takes the lead. And that's what we're learning about. But the way the Rebbe presents it is it's gvois. It's the practical side of things. Rather than the theoretical side of things, it's the practical side of things. So let's read inside, okay? We're on page 216. This is what we're holding. Page 216. It's the 3rd paragraph. V'ha'inyan bazeh. And the idea is this. Shekol achas minishayu b'nei Yisrael. Every single one of the daughters, of the women and daughters in Israel. Nikras is called Bas Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. She's the daughter of Sarah and Rivka and Rachel and Leah. V'harei ein ze rak melitza. This is not just a gleich vetel. This is not just a cute expression, as it were. It's a truth. Every Yiddish tochter is a daughter of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And by the way, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel and Leah were different people. We're different tchunis. Rachel has her tchunis, and Leah has her tchunis, and Rivka has her tchunis, and Sarah has her tchunis. And the Rebbe says, just like the Gemara says about the Ovis, Ein Kaden Ovis Ella Lishleisha. We only have 3 fathers. Now you have to understand, the expression in the Gemara is we only have Ein Kaden Ovis. We do not call father Ella Lishleisha, only 3, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. What does the Gemara mean to say? You don't call Reuven a father, you don't call Shimon a father, you don't call Levi a father, even though each one of us comes from one of the Yud Beis Shvatim. But Ein Keren Avis Ella L'Shloish. The pshat in this Gemara is that every Jew inherits all the characteristics of Avraham Avinu, which is Ava and Chesed, all the characteristics of Yitzchak Avinu, which is Yira and Gevura, and all the characteristics of Yaakov Avinu, which is Teferes, which is Rachamim, which is Simcha, all the characteristics associated with the Kavah Mitzvah, with Yaakov Avinu. So you call Avraham our father, Yitzchak our father, and Yaakov our father, because every Yid inherits from Avraham, from Yitzchak. What about the 12 Shvatim? It's not that way. If you're from Shevet Reuven, you have a Reuven character. If you're from Shevet Shimon, you have a Shimon character. You don't say that you inherit all the characteristics of the 12 Shvatim. Derech Hagav, while we're talking, I might as well mention that it says in Sfarim that there's 12 Nuschais HaTfilah. It says in Sfarim that there's 12 Nuschais HaTfilah. There's 12 different ways to daven. Because each Shevet has a different Nusach. Reuven has one Nusach, and Shimon has a second Nusach, and Levi has a third Nusach, and Yehuda has a fourth Nusach, and so on. The Arizal writes that in his times, the times of the Arizal, there were only 4 left. From those 12, there were only 4 known Nuschai. And then the Arizal continues and he says, we don't know which Shevet we belong to. So we don't know if we're davening the right Nusach. So the Arizal introduces a concept which is we all know about this. This is Rabbi Mangel's introduction to the English Siddur, which is called Shar HaKoilo, the encompassing gate, the 13th gate. The Arizal made the design. The Arizal never wrote a Siddur. But the Arizal gave Klolim how to write a Siddur. And the Alter Rebbe wrote the Siddur, which is Al Pi Nusach Arizal. Although the Alter Rebbe Siddur is not pure Arizal, there are other things in the Alter Rebbe Siddur besides for Arizal. But the Alter Rebbe made his Nusach Al Pi Nusach Arizal. Alter Rebbe's Siddur is outstanding in many ways. The most outstanding characteristic of the Alter Rebbe Siddur is that we know who made it. Ask an average Jew, who wrote your Nusach? Chassidim have a Nusach Sfad. Who wrote that Nusach? In the times of the Baal Shem Tov, Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, this Nusach was developed. It's hard to know who wrote this Nusach. Alter Rebbe's Siddur, we know exactly who wrote it. And Alter Rebbe's Siddur is Al Pi Kabbalah. It's very meduktik. It's incredibly precise in diktuk. And it's also precise in halacha. So the Alter Rebbe Siddur is very special. It's based on the Arizal's idea. And the Arizal idea, the Mesicha Maggid has a maimer on this called Shar HaKoilo. Since we don't know what Shevet we belong to, there's a Nusach that encompasses all of the Shvat. So the 13th gate, the Shar HaKoilo, is higher than the Yud Beis Shiyorim. Meaning to say, the way that daven is if from Shevet Reuven daven Reuven's Nusach, from Shevet Shimon daven Shimon's Nusach, from Shevet Levi daven Levi's Nusach, and so on. But we don't know what Nusach we belong to, so you go to the Sheirish. And the same is true here, that there's 12 fathers, and 12 mothers, every one of us belongs to one of the Yud Beis Shvatim, but there's 3 that we all belong to. Ein Kaden, Oves, Ella, Lishleisha, every single Yid is a descendant of Abraham, and Yitzchak, and Yankov. And as far as that's concerned, we inherit all the midas. The midah of Avraham, the midah of Yitzchak, and the midah of Yankov. So the Rebbe says, Shebechinas ha'aves harachlias b'cholam. What Avraham is, and what Yitzchak is, and Yankov is found by every Jew. You're not going to say that this is an Avraham Yid, although some Yidden are more native to Avraham Avinu. You're not going to say that this is a Yitzchak Yid, even though some people are more disposed in that direction. A Yid has in him Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yankov. Every single Jew possesses Yeshnam HaMides. You have all 3 midas. Shal Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov. Right? How do you translate Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yankov? Huh? I'll say it in a colloquial way. Avraham is he starts the ball rolling. Yitzchak means he makes everything perfect, and Yankov means he goes into Galus. If you break it down, that's how it is. Avraham starts it. Yitzchak perfects it. And Yankov suffers it. He goes into Golus and he's a Yid in spite of the Golus. Every Yid inherits from Avraham Avinu the koyach of the beginning, from Yitzchak the koyach of perfection, and from Yankov the koyach to survive Golus. So we have all 3 of their midas. Says the Rebbe, the same is true when it comes to the matriarch. So it says also in the same Gemara, Ein Kaden imois elo larbo. We have 4 mothers. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And of course, if you wanted to pay a copy, you would say, what about Bilhah and Zilpah? They're also mothers. Bilhah and Zilpah and Ichet. Yiddish Mamas. The Rebbe spoke in Nun Beis, Vayechi, that there's a word Barzel. Beis, Reish, Zayin, Lamed. So Barzel is Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, Leah. In other words, in a certain aspect, Bilhah and Zilpah are also considered the matriarchs. But the Gemara says we have 4 matriarchs. And the Taich we have 4 matriarchs is that every Jewish woman inherits the characteristics of Sarah, and the characteristics of Rivka, and the characteristics of Leah, and all the characteristics of all 4 imos. She'etzel kol achas minishay Yisrael, each one of Yiddish mames, yeshnam hamidis, you have each one of the midas of Sarah and Rivka and Rachel and Leah, parenthesis, Kimevur and Yoram Barucha, as the ideas of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah are explained in Chassidus and in Kabbalah at length, but the Rebbe doesn't tell us where. He just simply says, Sarah has her character, and Rivka has her character, and Rachel has her character, and Leah has her character. You have Maimonides Chassidus that explain the difference between the four matriarchs, and the Rebbe says each Yid inherits all four of those characteristics. And he concludes by saying, Ubeklolos, and in general this means Sheyamidu Beis Yisrael. The most important contribution of a Yiddish Mame is that they create the Jewish people. Bayis Sha'olav Teimar Teira, a home regarding which the Torah will say Bonsa Beisa. Right? What's such Bonsa Beisa? That a woman built her home with understanding, Inyan Shal Binyan, that the home she builds is built. Besides for everything else, the bottom line is you have to build Beis Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, and this is a task which is given to Yiddish Mamas. Now, I don't want to talk long, even though I'm in a talky mood. But Bekitzer, I'm looking at the clock. Is Rabbi Blooming here, Ariella? He's not here. No, but I'm saying, is he in town? Not is he waiting for me? I want to know if I have to finish on time. Yeah? I wonder how much time I have. But if Rabbi Blooming is not here, I could go a little slower. I don't know how to explain each one of the four. The Rebbe says every Yid inherits Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Yeah. So Sarah represents Shrara. She represents strength and leadership and power and, I guess, regality. Yeah. Rivka, it says in Lekutei Teireh, is in Merkava. She's a chariot. But the way it's explained in Chassidus about Rivka is Vateled ha'ayna v'tamala kada v'atol. Rivka brings Yitzchak to a higher level than Yitzchak would be by himself. That's the way it's explained in Teireh. Rivka represents a Merkava. She's a chariot for her husband, but she raises her husband to a level that he could not come to by himself. Leah is machshava. Leah is machshava. And Rachel is thought, whatever that means. Rachel is the matriarch of Galus. Right? We have four imahes. Each one has a different characteristic. Rachel is the mother of exile, of Galus, which is why she's not buried in the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. And the way the Rebbe spoke about it, the idea of Rachel is sacrifice. Rachel puts her children ahead of herself. So just like you say you have three avos, and each one of the avos has a different character trait, the basic character trait, and every Yid inherits the character traits of all of the avos. The same is true. Every Yidin inherits all of the characteristics of each one of the imais. She can be tough and strong like Sarah. She raises up her husband to a higher level like Rivka. She's involved in thought and in deeper things like Leah. And she's prepared for sacrifice like Rachel. I'm trying to find language for each one of the four imais, and this will have to suffice. It'll have to suffice because the clock doesn't have a heart. And by the way, when you say the clocks don't have hearts, that's a terrible thing, but it's also a very good thing. Because if clocks didn't have hearts, our hearts would be broken all the time. So the Rebbe concludes. Bottom of page 216. I made 10 copies. There's not 10 people here. So you should have enough. So the Rebbe says a woman's inyan is gvois. Gvois means that she's close to action. She's close to what's practical and what's actionable, what's happening in this world. Lofty things are very, very important. Principles and ideals and philosophies are the foundation of life, but it's not living it. Living the ideas that are theoretical is deeper than creating the theory. You know, it's the story with the feet, right? The bottom of the feet represent action. Bringing something all the way down to the lowest level, I described this yesterday a little bit, means that you're connected to it in the deepest levels. I said, this is a story that I tell often. That it's the same idea, just in other words, that the Baal Shem Tov asked, the Baal Shem Tov lived in Europe. The Eir HaChaim HaKadosh lived in Eretz Yisrael. The Chaim Ben Attar, he was a big tzaddik. He was a very big tzaddik apparently. He was a big makubal. He was in Neshama, a grace in Neshama. The specifics I don't know. So the Baal Shem Tov asked Rabbi Gershon Kittev, Rabbi Gershon was his brother-in-law, who was a Talmud by the Chaim Ben Attar, by the Eir HaChaim HaKadosh, that he should ask the Eir HaChaim if he thought they would ever meet physically. The Baal Shem Tov wanted to meet the Eid HaChaim. It doesn't sort him. But three times, Baal Shem Tov tried to go to Eretz Yisrael. Yudel Chitrik writes two of the stories. The third story doesn't write. But it's known, as they schreibt it, that on three different occasions the Baal Shem Tov tried to go to Eretz Yisrael. Each time his plans were foiled. Because the Baal Shem Tov knew that if he will meet Eid HaChaim HaKadosh, it will be very good. Some people say, Mashiach will come. I don't know the pratim. I'm not sure about the details. But there's all kinds of legends about what would have happened if the Baal Shem Tov meet Eid HaChaim HaKadosh. So the Baal Shem Tov wrote his brother-in-law, who lived in Eretz Yisrael, was a Tamuz of Eid HaChaim HaKadosh, and he asked him to ask the Eid HaChaim if they will ever meet. If the Baal Shem Tov and the Eid HaChaim will ever meet. Now they used to meet on the other side all the time, but he meant in this world. So the Eid HaChaim HaKadosh said to the Geshen Kitevet, ask the Baal Shem Tov, ask your brother-in-law, when he sees me over there, how do I look? So the Baal Shem Tov answered that when I see him over there, I see his entire body, except for the bottom of his feet. I see his whole goof, I don't see the soles of his feet. So the Eid HaChaim HaKadosh said, if that is the case, we'll never meet in this world. This is the story. At Kana Sipur. The toichen of the Sipur, the lesson of the Sipur, the remedy of the Sipur is, the bottom of the feet represent action. And as much as we don't think it's a big deal, it's the biggest deal. Like I said, anybody who goes on Miftzoyim, anybody who's involved in Kiruv, and we all are, people always ask, why is the mitzvah so important? Why do I have to do the ritual? Have to light the candle, have to do it on time, have to read these words, have to say this, have to do this mitzvah. What's wrong with meditation and spirituality? And the answer to that question is a simple one. Why does it bother you so much? Why does it bother you that in Yiddishkeit everything is a ma'aseh b'peh? What's the answer? Because it's inconvenient. Oh, that's exactly why the Eibishter wants it. That's exactly why the Eibishter wants it. The Eibishter wants from you what you don't want to give him. What don't you want to give him? The physical level, the bottom of the feet. And that's what the Eibishter demands. Because when you bring things to a ma'aseh b'peh, to an actualization in this world, you complete it. The lowest part of the body completes the body. If you're missing the bottoms of the feet, the head isn't whole. And that's the touch, Megvois Ashurenu. And in this Sicha, the Rebbe says, this is what women add. They see to it that the ideas of Yiddishkeit do not remain ideas, they become actions. Okay, now let's read. V'oz, and as a consequence of this, Nasa'in dinekeva tesevev gever, the idea that the woman is higher than her husband, because shehi moisifa koyach v'chayes, she adds energy and life, ba'aveidose shala gever, in the work of her husband, b'inyan of who and the things that he is busy with, kemevuer, kemedubor v'hisvad shalifnei zeh, which the Rebbe discussed in the Fabrengen before this, which is Pashas Nosei, which we did not learn. I want you to know, I gave a Shir Friday. It's not well attended, but I give a Shir Friday. I teach a Maimer. I have Mrs. Stullick. That's all I need, Mrs. Stullick. So we learned the Maimer V'hoya Ekiv. This past Friday, V'hoya Ekiv. So the Rebbe explained a bunch of words. It's a beautiful Maimer. Ekiv, and then Tishmun, Shmatem, Bazisa. At the end of the Maimer, the Rebbe goes back to the word V'hoya. It says in Chazal, Ein v'hoya el loshen simcha. The word v'hoya is a word that denotes simcha. Vayehi, and it was, is not a good word in Chazal, in Tanakh. V'hoya, it will be, like v'hoya im shomaya, v'hoya eikev tishmun, it will be, in the future is loshen simcha. So the Rebbe said, why? Because in the word v'hoya, the vav kei comes before the yud kei. V'hoya is vav hey, yud hey. Hashem's name is Yud Kei Vav Kei, and V'hoya, the Vav Kei comes before the Yud Kei. What does that mean? The woman goes ahead of her husband. That's good. Nekeva to save of Geva. So the Rebbe mentions this here as well. Okay, Shehigia Hazman, the time has come. Shanoshim Tizarzena Es Ha'anosh. The women should encourage their husbands. Belimud Sheyurei Teda, and learning Teda, when sinners have stock and giving tzedakah. As well as Bishari and Yonim and the remaining things that arguably are the domain of the husband and the father. The wife has to give her husband a kick in the pants, and the Metzias is Eloi. It's a fact of life. It's a fact of life that a Hasidic lady can change her home, including her husband. If the Rebbe says, if it is my belief that the time has come for women to raise up their husbands in the business which is really exclusively the husband's business. I mean, I teach women. I teach women every single day. I teach men occasionally. Al pi halacha, a man is mechuyev to learn Torah. Al pi halacha, a woman does not have a chiyuv to learn Torah. She has a chiyuv to know how to do mitzvahs. So in order to do mitzvahs, she has to learn the halachas to teach her how to do the mitzvahs she needs to do. A man has a chiyuv to learn Torah, and I'm sure there's a lot of reasons. But one of the realities is a man who doesn't learn Torah is missing something that affects his entire identity as a Jew. If a woman doesn't learn Torah, emunah can hold her. A man must learn, and if the man doesn't learn, the wife has to kick him out of the house. So the Rebbe says a woman has to be involved in her husband's affairs as a yid, that he should do them correctly. And he says, "V'alachas kama v'kama," and certainly b'negeil and yonam ha'mishutafim. Those spheres that a couple shares, that it's not his or hers. And of course, uppermost in that is the chinuch of the Yiddish kinder. They say in English, it takes a village to raise a child. It's true. It does take a village to raise a child. In America, you're afraid of the village. You want to keep your kids in the house. You're afraid what's going on in the street. My wife always tells me that you go to Israel, children leave the house in the morning and they come home when the sun sets. Finished. They're raised by the street. I can't hear you. But they say that the kids are happier and healthier and more wholesome. The street is safe. The street is safe, at least in some parts. In America, you can't trust the street to raise your child, but certainly it's an obligation. It's a joint effort. One parent cannot raise a child. You need to have a husband and a wife, and his mashpi and her mashpi, and you think about it once, you think about it twice, you think about it 100 times. You know what it says in the Hayem Yem, that it's a mitzvah to think a half an hour every day about the chinuch of your children. The shaila is a half an hour per child, or a half an hour per child. If you have kanai no'ara, it could be 6 hours, 7 hours a day. But l'chalabach is a halbe shon tog, that's the chinuch of the kids. This happens when a husband and a wife talk to each other. And matters of chinuch are joint. The husband and wife don't always agree. You know, I want to tell you a word. I once repeated this at a Fabrengen, and I got such a pushback. I was very surprised. I really was surprised. I have a nephew who married a Gordon. Schallenberg Gordon's granddaughter. Schallenberg Gordon's passed away maybe 20 years ago, I don't know, a while ago. He was a shliach in New Jersey. His wife was Rabbi Simpson's daughter. Her name was Miriam. They were special people, very Chassidish people. They have a few sons. They have a son in Australia. They have an unfortunate son who's passed away, and then they have a son in London. And they have many daughters, right? Manus Friedman's wife is a Gordon, and so on. So there's a kind of rasach techte, all shluchos. When they got married, they went into Yechidus the Frierdiker Rebbe with their parents, and the Rebbe gave brachas and herois. She had these brachas and herois. She would show them to her children before they got married, but she didn't want to be mefarsim until she passed away. She allowed her son to be mefarsim at a wedding. She passed away during the chuppah. I mean, it's one of those stories that makes your hair stand on your head. She didn't want to publicize this yechidus till she passed away. She allowed one of her children to publicize it during the chuppah of that child. Her neshama was leilad shamayim, exactly the way she planned it. And one of the things that it says in this Rishima, the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking to the two of them, to a young couple, and he says everybody has milas, everybody has chasreinis. Frierdiker Rebbe is giving counsel to a bocher and a bachura how to live their lives. He says the milas you should see with big oisias, and the chesrenis you should see with small oisias. You shouldn't not see chesrenis, but don't look at your husband's fault, at your wife's fault, and define her or him by that. Define them by their milas. And then the Rebbe went on. Mendaf, alles is ook allemaal doorgereden, zag. Kein zag nicht ton alleen. Alles ton zusammen. Advice to a young couple. You should talk everything over. You should never do anything alone. Everything you do, you should do jointly. The Rebbe says instructions to a young Chassidish couple. You talk to her, she should talk to him, and they should resolve things together. So I repeated to the Fabrengen of men, of course. And I said, listen, the one person in the world you can be honest with is your wife. And all the guys said, no. So this is a story of Yechidus with a Chassid. And I mentioned another thing, that the Frierdiker Rebbe The Frierdiker Rebbe told our Rebbe, it's in the Rebbe's journal, and it's now in print, that his father went through hardships. The Rebbe Rashab went through hardships at a certain point, when he was already a Rebbe. So he told our Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, I didn't know about it at all. And als to tell the mama, the Rebbe Rashab's confidant was his wife. It's a very interesting, when the Frierdiker Rebbe traveled, he traveled alone. Frierdiker Rebbe traveled a lot. The Rebbe Rashab, when he traveled, always took his wife. He never traveled alone. The Rebbe Rashab, even when the Frierdiker Rebbe was a child and he needed a mother, the Rebbe Tishtana went with the Rebbe on all of his trips. So the Rebbe talks about doing things jointly, and certainly when it comes to chinuch, you need to have two heads. And if your husband is lazy or not interested or in a bad mood, you have to say, if we don't deal with the little problem today, we're going to deal with the big problem tomorrow. And then you're going to apply yourself. So apply yourself now. It's not easy sometimes to get your husband to pay attention. Your kids in kindergarten, what's the big deal? It's a very big deal. This is joint for a father and a mother. Shekain, because even though it's true that according to halacha, chinuch begins migil sheish shonim v'mayla, from the age of 6 upwards, umutal legamri alachrayis, which is halachically on the husband. Now, of course, I think this is a bit tricky because from the age of 6, it's not only chinuch. From the age of 6, it's called Talmud Torah. There's 2 things, When you're raising a child, there's 2 things. Number 1, you have a chiv to teach him Torah. Teaching him Torah is a mitzvah say de'iraisa, v'shinantam levanecha. That obligation is only on a husband. Why? Because the wife has no chiv to learn herself. And b'chlal, there's a rule that a mitzvah from you're patur from helping somebody else do that mitzvah. There's a couple of exceptions that I'm not going to get into, as they say in the real world, or whatever. A man has a chiyuv to learn Torah, but chinuch doesn't mean teaching Torah. Chinuch means teaching him how to be a Jew, how to do a mitzvah, how to wear a tzitzeh, how to keep his yarmulke on, to be able to make a bracha, not to speak nivel peh. This is chinuch. This is certainly joint. And the Rebbe says chinuch. L'chayre means chinuch for Talmud Torah, although I'm not sure. Says that he's mitzayin to Encyclopedia Talmudis. I could look it up. Whether she's obligated or not obligated, it's her business, right? It's her business. And of course, what it says in Chassidus, that the things that we're not obligated to do is not the pshat. They're not important. The things not obligated to do is the pshat. It's so natural that you don't have to be told. It's part of who you are. Let's finish. Top of page 217, please. But the point is, now let me just make something clear. We are learning a Fabrengen of Yud Beis Tamuz. That's what we're doing. We're learning a Fabrengen of Yud Beis Tamuz. And I selected, at the beginning of the summer, the Sichas of the Fabrengen of Yud Beis Tamuz that I wanted to learn, and we learned them. And one of the Sichas that I chose was this one, because this is the Sicha. Yud Beis Tamuz is one of the big Fabrengens, and the Rebbe is speaking to women. The inyanim of women, the role of women. So now the Rebbe concludes the Sicha with the following. There's the literal meaning of the word, that when Bilam Arasha looks at the Jewish people, he looks into their past, and he sees Gvois. Gvois means the Imois. Ein mikra yoytzi midei pshuta, this means literally, koyal arbe Imois. Bilam Arasha looks to our past, he sees Avraham, he sees Yitzchak, he sees Yankiv, he sees Sarah, he sees Rivka, he sees Rachel, he sees Leah. The Yidden are gebenched because of their Sheder Shomaka, because of their roots, where they come from. And this is not only that our parents were nice people, so the Eibush is going to judge us with a good eye. It's our parents were nice people, and the niceties of our parents are in our kishkis, they're in our genes. This distinction of the Dalad Imois was given to every single Jewish woman and girl. As tafkidan, they should satisfy, they should fulfill their mission. Livnei's bias, to build a home. Be'efen in such a way, Sha'kadosh Baruch Hu Yicholema, that the Eibush says, Kan ani keveis HaMedina, I'm going to live here. This is a lashon obviously from the Maimir, which we did not learn. Even though Meblilis Yarib Ne'amayim Merabim Shalelam Hazeh Shalaguf and Nefesh HaBahamis, we're living in this world, and we have a guf, and we have a Nefesh HaBahamis, right? That in other places it's called Mayim Merabim, the raging waters of Elam Hazeh. But if the home is built the way a Yiddish mama builds a home, the Eibishter says, I'm not afraid. It'll be good. It'll be the way it's supposed to be. V'kiva and Shebein Medina, and as much as we build a home, Avor Melech Macha Mocham HaKadosh Baruch Hu the Eibishter, Hareizu Medina is obviously going to be a place, Sheyeshba, which will include Kol Tuv, all good. Ruchni, spiritually, V'chol Tuv, and all good Gashmi. That's how the Sicha finishes, and then the Rebbe says to sing the Benyani and Avinu Malkeinu. Okay, this is the Sicha. This is Sicha about Chinuch, in plain words. The Rebbe is speaking to the Sheikh Abad about the importance of Chinuch. And I mentioned this to you yesterday, right? This is 60 years ago. This is 1960. Now we're 2020. Between 1960 and 2020, there was a women's liberation. The women's liberation changed the role of women. Now, the skeptics will say women's liberation did not happen because there was a revolution. Women's liberation happened because there was a washing machine, and because there was a refrigerator, and there were other things that freed women from the work that women used to do in the olden times. But whether this is the reason of women's liberation, or this is the women's liberation, women's roles are different. And unfortunately, in America especially, there's a very big confusion about what the roles of women is. Women, the Rebbe said, a woman's success is if she succeeds at those things that men succeed at. But Torah says, and the Rebbe says, and the reality shows, you can't change the basic nature of men and women. A woman can do many things that maybe 100 years ago people said women cannot do. But the idea that a woman can nurture, and a woman can sacrifice for her children, like Rachel did, this is never going to change, because this is what the Eibishter made. And the Eibishter made it that it should be eternal. And the Rebbe says, as much as the world changes, these fundamentals cannot change. The old question of nature and nurture, you can't change the nature of people. The Eibishter created women with a different nature than men. And only they are in the position to build the Jewish people. And that's what the Rebbe is talking to. Okay, I will see you all on Thursday.